What's up, guys? Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here with you. Time to talk some best bets for NFL Divisional Weekend. I want to get out in front of the narrative, John. I'm very under the weather. I'm fighting through. So if my voice sounds weird, if my eyes look like red and drained, that is why. But the show must go on, baby. We got 4 big games coming at us this weekend. We're coming off a good wildcard weekend as well. I want to give you props. We both went 2-1 on our 3 plays. Both hit our locks. You locked up the Bills to cover against Denver. I had Philly covering the 4.5 against Green Bay. Came very, very close on the parlays, John. The Chargers and Texans game just killed us in a number of ways. You were on the Chargers to cover the 2.5. I was on the under 42.5 in that game. Dog. The live total was 29.5 with 14 seconds left in the third quarter. I was going into tracking mode, and what happened? We got I think it was 18 points over the course of about 4 minutes. The pick six, the other pick that brought Houston into the red zone, and then to top it all off, the 86-yard touchdown on 3rd and long to Lad McKechnie. Just a brutal way to feel like, or to lose what felt like a lock under. Nonetheless, we move on to divisional weekend, and very curious to get your thoughts on all these games. I know you were really high on Baltimore last week. You hit the Ravens minus 9.5 over Pittsburgh. I believe that was the Pete Weber. That's right, I did it. Lock of the week. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
As far as that game goes, we will have an official play there. I'm curious to see whether or not you will be joining me on my side, because I do kind of like your Baltimore Ravens to go on the road and win that game. But one note that I will share here, John, is the outright winner in the divisional round over the last 50 divisional games. The outright winner is 37-12-1 against the spread. So we're talking north of a 75% cover rate for those teams that win outright. And of course, we have 3 sizable home favorites. Chiefs right now, 8.5-point favorites over Houston across the board. That Lions number, I briefly saw an 8.5 out there earlier today. That's been mostly at 9.5. And the Eagles 6.5 over the Rams. But let's start with Ravens Bills here, because I will say right away, I like the Ravens -1. I'll probably just take the Baltimore money line here. As a Ravens fan, how are you approaching this game? Is there any sort of emotional hedging going on? Do you just want to be able to watch it objectively? How do you approach it?
I do want to watch it objectively, but again, for the sake of the show, I talk enough Ravens smack on this pod here, and certainly did last week for the Steelers game, to where can't let the fans down. But yeah, I mean, it's the game of the playoffs, in my opinion. I think whoever wins this game has a very good chance of winning it all. I think we're not often treated to a game quite of this magnitude in the divisional round, with something where you have 2 guys that are trying to get over the mountaintop that is Patrick Mahomes and slay the dragon, but they got to win this one to even make it to the castle. I'm mixing all sorts of metaphors here, but
the moat, if you will.
Yes. So that we've got that in play. There's been, I think the algorithm on Twitter is so touchy now that I'm just getting like Bill's Twitter just streamed into my brain constantly, and that they're really leaning on how much the game back in September, early October does not matter whatsoever, because Matt Milano is going to play. I didn't realize that he was that much of a difference maker, personally, but nonetheless. But I come back to you a little bit. It's not 1-to-1, and the roster's a little bit different now. But 2 years ago, the divisional round, Bills, they're hosting the Bengals. The Bengals actually had basically an entire line of backups for that one. It was snowy in that one, which obviously changed some things, but the Bengals just pushed them around, right? Both sides of the trenches just bullied the Bills, and the Bills' offensive line is full of tanks. They absolutely are going to be able to get some push, I think, but I still wonder about the Bills' physicality in their front seven and its ability to hold up against Baltimore. I don't think that Baltimore wants to throw it a ton. I think they want a script very similar to what we saw a week ago against Pittsburgh. I see them kind of going to the Lamar Jackson run game early to kind of get him into a rhythm. I think famously over the first few years of Lamar Jackson's playoff experience, tried to do too much, tried to throw too much, was unable to get into rhythms. They were either tied or trailing at halftime in each of their playoff games until last week under Lamar Jackson. They ran him a bunch last week. They ran him a bunch early on as well, and I think that got him into a rhythm. I think he's still super dangerous as a runner. I don't think that that's too hot of a take to say. The Bills are going to have to be ready for that, and if the Lamar Jackson run game isn't working, Derrick Henry is there. I don't think that we're going to see an evaporation the way that we did last year with Gus Edwards and company in that backfield. So if the Bills can stop the run completely or like hold Baltimore really under like 200 yards rushing, I think that they have a very good chance of winning this game. Mm-hmm. If Baltimore has its way in that sense, I mean, Josh Allen can do superhero stuff, of course, no question about it. But I'm skeptical that I think that the game would maybe potentially get away from them a little bit, and I sense that Buffalo won't be able to stop the run that well, and therefore I do like Baltimore in this spot.
Yeah, I know that's not one of your 3 official plays, but it is for me. I'm taking the Ravens money line. I'm going to lock that one in. First of all, it's exceptionally rare to see a road favorite in the divisional round. Obviously, Buffalo opened as a 1.5 point favorite that quickly reversed in about 24 hours. But we've only had, a road favorite in the divisional round a handful of times over the last few decades. So I think that speaks to some of the faith in the market right now on Baltimore. Obviously, nothing would surprise me here. This isn't going to be the Nick Whalen lock of the year. I think we do have 2 very evenly matched teams, but I think you laid out a lot of the key reasons why Baltimore has some advantages here. I trust the consistency of the Ravens running game more than I do the Bills. I think if you just want to narrow it down in basic terms, like who has the better running back, I trust Derrick Henry more than I do James Cook. And Cook's really good. He's a very good player, but he's not Derrick Henry. You mentioned Lamar. He's been more willing to use his legs as a weapon. Certainly was last week against Pittsburgh, set the tone early in that game. Whether it goes to that extreme, I don't know. I mean, there's like 5 plays in a row on that first drive where he was running the ball. But it's something the Bills have to worry about. They put that on tape, I think, for a reason, right? I think you have to be so concerned about where Lamar is at all times. They're splitting him out. They're running him on fake jet sweeps. Like, that's just a lot to keep up with if you're a Bills defense that is solely focused on slowing down Derrick Henry in a Ravens running game that ran for 277 yards in that Week 4 beatdown. Now, Baltimore has been a little bit vulnerable to the deep ball. Obviously, the defense and the secondary has been significantly better over the last couple of months than it was early on. But how did Pittsburgh score its 2 touchdowns last week? Van Jefferson, George Pickens, those Ravens corners, I think still, I don't trust them when the ball's in the air. There was like I think it was the Pickens play where there's like 2 Ravens defenders who had a chance at it, and like somehow both ran past George Pickens, just drops right into his arms. Obviously you worry about Josh Allen and his ability to throw deep, but they don't really have that kind of weapon, right? It's like, I don't know that that's really what the Bills want to do. It's like Keon Coleman, maybe that worries you a little bit. He's kind of a George Pickens light in some ways, but they don't have that alpha downfield receiver who I think can necessarily win those one-on-ones. So I'm going to put my faith in the Baltimore defense. I'm going to put my faith in the Baltimore running game. I think they get this done on the road. I have a couple thoughts, though, or a couple questions for you, John. First of all, Zay Flowers has not practiced so far this week. We're recording this around noon Central, 1 Eastern on Thursday. So we should get an update on his Thursday status at some point. If he's not out there, if he's hobbled at all, if this is one of those situations where, he's doing everything to play and maybe he's out there, but he's not 100%, how much does that matter for this matchup versus, not having him last week against Pittsburgh?
I think it's about the same. I think that the level that Lamar Jackson's playing at right now, you don't want to go too deep into the bench and be relying on Tylan Wallace for 5 targets or anything like that. But at the same time, Isaiah likely has shown when he's needed, whether it was when Mark Andrews was out down the stretch last season or last week, that he can be this kind of X factor. I mean, we saw it also in that Week 1 game against the Chiefs. So he's a guy that can absolutely step up in this spot. Mark Andrews has played very well of late. And Rashad Bateman, 1 target, 1 touchdown. I think that he gets a little bit more involved, a little bit more targets get funneled his way. I don't think that Baltimore's under 20 pass attempts the same way it was last week. I think that Josh Allen's going to be able to answer a little bit more. So Baltimore's going to have to play a little bit more balanced in that sense. But I mean, I'm not downplaying how good Zay Flowers is, but you can't expect him to be remotely close to 100% in this game, even if he does suit up. I think that Harbaugh has said that he's a guy that can play despite not practicing, but even still, you don't expect him to play the full allotment of snaps and maybe kind of a decoy out there, if nothing else. But I think that, again, Jackson's playing at a level, and there's still just enough as far as the pass catching options to where I'm not overly concerned about like the weaponry around Lamar Jackson. It's just a matter of him being able to deal with the cold, deal with the pass rush, and have a clean platform to throw from.
All right, I have one more thought on this game, and then I promise, move to the rest of the slate. But this is the game of the year, man. I want to give it its due justice. The total in this one is 51.5. That's the number I'm seeing at just about every major book right now. That's been pretty static throughout the week. The weather. We're looking at somewhere between like 10 and 18 degrees in Buffalo on Sunday night. There's a slight chance of snow. It's not going to be a ton of wind, but obviously it's going to be cold. With the wind chill, we're talking sub 10 degree weather. Lamar Jackson has never played in a postseason game that has finished at more than 44 points. Last year against Houston, 34-10. That was the highest scoring playoff game he's ever participated in. Josh Allen has played in 4 playoff games that have gone over 51.5. 2 more that finished at exactly 51. So we have kind of 2 trends working against each other here. But obviously, when the Ravens have had success in the postseason, they tend to win lower scoring games. Is there any sort of correlated play there? Like if you like the Ravens, maybe go under, or is that just kind of a weird anomaly so far to begin Lamar's postseason career? Do you have any read on the total?
Yeah, I think you draw a good parallel there, and the two most recent or 2 of the more recent ones, either last week against Pittsburgh or the game against Houston last year. Like Baltimore's offense actually showed up in both of those games. I expect the Bills' offense to show up here, so I'm not totally certain on a correlated play necessarily, because I think that Buffalo is going to be able to hang in there. This is going to be a really close, one possession type of game in my estimation. So I think if you like the Bills, you definitely like the over. I stopped short of thinking that if it's under the Ravens win necessarily, or at least to the point where I'm like stacking it in to a same game parlay.
Fair. All right, so I'm on the Ravens. We've hit every angle of that game. Let's go to your first official pick of the week, John. You're taking the Philadelphia Eagles.
I am taking the Philadelphia Eagles. They are listed as 6-point favorites over at DraftKings. Importantly, there's some 6.5s out there at other books, so I will go with the 6. I'm fading the recency bias element of this game. I think that everyone saw how good the Rams looked on Monday night. And then, by contrast, the Eagles I thought they looked pretty shaky on Sunday, especially offensively against the Packers. But I think what the Rams were able to do to the Vikings to kind of blow up that entire offense, that doesn't really play here against the Eagles, right? Like, they just got after Sam Darnold. The Vikings got behind early and were in this catch-up mode. They were kind of frantic, totally thrown off of their rhythm throughout it. Philly doesn't want to throw the ball more than like 25 times if they don't have to. And I think Jalen Hurts' form last week is kind of going to make some people a little bit nervous maybe about this Eagles offense this week. But I think that the run game for Philly is going to be paramount in this spot. The Rams aren't that good against the run. And this is obviously an offensive line and a running back quarterback pairing that is, much, much different than what the Vikings had out there, where Sam Darnold kind of statuesque, Aaron Jones, nice player, but not someone that you're like really, really tailoring, and not the most featured part of that Vikings offense. So I think, I'll give Philly a little bit of grace. I think sometimes teams that have those Super Bowl aspirations, as the Eagles do, can come out a little tight in that first playoff game. I think that, being back at home, this spot, have a slight rest advantage here as well against the Rams as well. I think it's enough to where if you like the Rams, you're kind of just taking it all on last week, and Philly is just such a different team than the Vikings. So give me the Eagles.
I think you said something very important, which is giving the Eagles some grace for winning a postseason game by multiple scores and basically dominating the entire game defensively. I don't, I guess I get it. It was somewhat of a letdown performance offensively. They kind of stalled out after that initial touchdown following the fumbled kickoff, like 4 straight drives. They came up empty, but the Packers are a good team. They're clearly not a great team, but they're a good team, right? And it's like, okay, so you win this game by multiple scores. It was never in doubt at any point. And the narrative coming out of this from Philly fans is like, oh boy, team's falling apart. We're not going to win against the Rams. Like, come on, man. And you could have tacked on another touchdown at the end and it basically made that a 29-10 game. So I think all fan bases kind of do that to some degree, but there are a lot of teams in the NFL that would have loved to grind out a home playoff win in the wild card round. So I don't really hold that performance against Philly. I think this is a good matchup for them. Like you said, Rams were like 26th in rush defense EPA, 4.6 yards per carry allowed in the regular season. It's a spot where I don't necessarily think the Eagles have to play a perfect game. I think you got to play a clean game. You can't be turning it over 2 or 3 times, but I think there are enough advantages here for the Eagles. I think the conditions in Philly will play in their favor. And like you said, I think if you're on the Rams, you're kind of riding the wave of momentum from this past week, which is just we haven't seen that kind of defensive potential, that kind of pass rush consistently from that Rams team all season. It's a very nice improved defense, but I think to ask them to repeat that level of performance is just not realistic.
Yeah, Les Snead obviously did an amazing job. It's funny how the Rams basically eschewed the draft for years, and then they finally had draft picks last year, and they're all awesome. I will say regarding Philly, I like them here. If you're looking at the futures market, I got some doubts.
Really?
I would not put down on the Eagles to either win the NFC or win the Super Bowl. I do think that Jalen Hurts, I think that offense is not one where if the defense is letting the other team score a little bit, that they are built to play a catch up or having to match scores. So I don't like them beyond this weekend, but I do like them here.
All right, so there we have it. Official play on the Eagles this week. Fade the Eagles next week from John McKechnie.
That's right.
All right, I'm going with the under 41.5 in KC Houston. I don't love this. The number's gotten to the point where it's becoming iffy. I wish I would have just officially grabbed it at 43.5 earlier in the week. So I don't trust the Houston offense here. I don't really give them a ton of credit for what we saw last week. It was a nice bounce back. Maybe a team that was a little bit undervalued heading into that home playoff game, but it's not like they won that game offensively. They won it defensively.
No.
And the offense, the one touchdown drive in the first half, they convert this crazy like 3rd and 16 where Stroud drops the snap, he's rolling out, and there's Xavier Hutchinson sitting wide open. You're not going to get those opportunities against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are not going to hand you 4 turnovers like the Chargers did, including a pick 6, including another one that set them up deep in the red zone. So it kind of comes down to what Kansas City does offensively, because I really like the under 16.5 on the Houston team total. It's really a question of, does Kansas City score more than 24, 27 here? Because we're obviously looking at a low bar. I mean, this is the lowest total ever in a Patrick Mahomes playoff game. One of the lowest totals he's ever faced in his career. I think if it closes at 41.5, it will be the second lowest total he's ever had, behind that Christmas game against, was it Christmas? It was some sort of holiday game against the Raiders last year.
Oh, that was Christmas.
Yeah, so that was number one. But I think they're really going to struggle to approach 20 points. Houston is. Their offense, when they've been big underdogs in the CJ Stroud era, so we're only talking about a 2-game sample here. He's only been in the league 2 years, but when he's been a dog of at least 8 points, the Texans have scored 9 points and 10 points in those 2 games. I don't really see Houston doing enough to keep up. I don't see this as an explosive offensive game for the Chiefs either. That's of course part of the handicap. I think we saw some signs from KC towards the end of the year. Xavier Worthy getting more involved. Hollywood Brown, I think, has made a bigger difference than people realize. I think it's possible that we get a better version of Travis Kelce in the postseason. Maybe he's been coasting a little bit. But against this Houston defense, I don't think this is the spot where, Kansas City puts a 30 spot on here. I think they do just enough to win. I think it could look, kind of similar to that Ravens-Steelers game last week, where it feels dominant, but it only ends up being a 2-score result. So I'm on the under 41.5 here. This feels to me like a 24-13 type of game.
Yeah, and I go back and forth with this one as far as the total is concerned, because there was so much fluky stuff. Apologies for my dog; he's excited about this one, but there was some flukiness from that Chargers game. Like the Chargers, thought things would be different under Harbaugh, but I think like the just general postseason curse of the Chargers has yet to be exercised, as it were. So I mean, like you said, I think that's the key point, that the Texans aren't going to get the type of cushy advantages and setups that they were afforded last week. So, but I still just, even with how low this number is, I'm still not ready to buy all the way in on the Chiefs offense. I know they looked better those final 2 weeks of the regular season. or last two regular season games that they actually took seriously. Broncos game notwithstanding, of course, that they did start to look better, against the Steelers and the Texans themselves. But, I can definitely see this one being under. And like you said, that if the Texans offense here has some struggles and isn't capitalizing, then, it's hard to imagine them getting much more than like 13 points. Therefore, the Chiefs Texans under makes sense to me. I'm gonna dovetail off this game though. Again, our options are limited this week, but I'm gonna go ahead. I know I was just talking about recency bias creeping in as a reason to fade the Rams. I'm gonna let it creep in a little bit this time around.
Yeah, creep on in. Why not?
Yeah, it's the Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I'm playing both sides, so either way I win type of deal here. So I think that, this is a setup where, and I wonder how much the Chiefs factor into that stat that you led the show off with when it comes to teams that win in the divisional round cover, because oftentimes in the divisional round the Chiefs have probably been pretty significant favorites, but Mahomes is 0-5-1 in the playoffs when favored by 7 or more points. So I kind of come back to similar to what you were saying about the Ravens-Steelers game, where it's a dominant performance, but it maybe doesn't look that way on the scoreboard. I see this as maybe like a 20-13 style chokeout, but by the Chiefs, and that gets us home. So I think that I'm dubious that this Chiefs team blows them out. I think the Texans defense is strong enough, and the Chiefs offense not quite as explosive as we've seen, to where I think the Texans make it lipstick on the pig. The scoreboard doesn't look as bad as what we actually see on the field.
We're definitely on chokeout watch here. I think we can agree on that. I think this will be a confirmed chokeout by Kansas City. One more note on the under, by the way, from our pals over at VSiN. When the road team in a divisional game fails to reach 20 points, the under is 29-7-1 in the last 37 games. So we're talking about an 81% under rate in that span. So again, I do think when it comes to the total, it's not going to be decided by Houston. I think it's going to be decided by KC. And a couple more notes here to back up your point. CJ Stroud 7-4 ATS when he is an underdog against teams above 500 in his career. And you mentioned Patrick Mahomes 0-5-1. In the playoffs as a big favorite since 2020. Overall, he is 15-27 ATS as a 7+ point favorite. That is the worst mark of any quarterback in the NFL.
That's crazy. What an interesting entity Patrick Mahomes is. He's the GOAT, pretty much, or he's on track to be the GOAT already. But anytime that the logical line is out there, it's the Chiefs are going to roll them. Somehow it just doesn't happen. It boggles the mind.
All right. Detroit, Washington. We both have a play on this game. I'll go first, John. Detroit minus 8.5. Timely recording of this episode because it did drop from 9.5 to 8.5 at DraftKings just in the last 30 minutes or so. So I'm jumping on that. Teams laying at least 6 in the divisional round, 33-1 straight up, 21-22-1 ATS over the last 44 games. So kind of an interesting dichotomy. Wanted to put that out there. These teams tend to clean up. They don't tend to lose outright, but as far as the spread goes, it does get a little bit dicey. I'm diving in with Detroit. I think this team needed the bye week more than any team in recent memory. They're getting David Montgomery back. Terry and Arnold avoided a major injury. They might get some other key pieces back on that defense. I have a lot of respect for Washington. Can absolutely see them hanging around, trying to control clock like they did last week. I just think that's a much tougher ask against this Detroit team and a Detroit defense that feels like it's playing with some momentum after that Minnesota game in Week 18. The Jaden Daniels factor does concern me, as opposed to facing a Sam Darnold or a Matthew Stafford. It's just a completely different set of rules, set of circumstances for that defense. But this feels to me like the Commanders kind of run out of gas game. We give them a nice round of applause, where it's mid fourth quarter and we're talking what a great season. This game aside, Jaden Daniels has had an incredible year. They go on the road, they win at Tampa Bay. Nobody thought this team would make the playoffs. I think that's how it goes. I think Washington comes out, it gets dicey early on, but Detroit just has so much firepower, man. Getting Montgomery back, adds just another element to that running game. Washington, by the way, could not run the ball last week on Tampa Bay. Should be a slightly better matchup in that regard against Detroit, but I don't think, you can't rush for 55 yards as a team and expect to keep this game close. against the Detroit Lions. I think the Lions' offensive potential to me is just so high that I could see Washington playing a really good game. I could see Daniels playing well. Like maybe they turn it over once as a team, and this game ends up 37-27, and Detroit ends up covering.
Yeah, it's just, I think the Lions just kind of are that dude in the NFC, and I think getting healthy at the right time, coming off the bye, I think that they were one of those teams where the bye was really fortuitous for them. They got Anzalone back in that last game as well. So, the defense, which looked a little bit dicey there with all the losses that it had late in the season, it showed something, again, kind of like what I was saying about the Rams strategy against the Vikings. The Lions won't be able to do the same exact thing and just blitzkrieg the Washington to death here, because you blitz Daniels, you risk him breaking contain and picking up yards, extending drives. But we saw time and again, we talked about it on the pod last week, like so many drives for Washington that they were able to extend and have these really, really long drives. I don't see that in a hostile environment like Ford Field in this setup against the Lions defense. So Washington kind of gets put in a spot where it has to play out of its usual comfort zone. They have to score fast. I think that it starts to work against them in time. So yeah, I think that the Lions, like they again, great season for Washington, but this might get a little rough for them.
What's your read on the total here, Jonathan?
As much as I would love to see the over, because that would mean that both sides are clicking and we're treated to just like an awesome game on Saturday night. Would love to see that, especially after the amount of snooze fest that we were treated to during the wild card round. But I like the under. I think that this is a spot where Washington's again gonna struggle to keep up. I know that. Last week, we saw the Commanders game with the really high total go under. Last year in the divisional round, when Detroit was playing against the Buccaneers, we got the over 49. There were 54 total points scored in that game. So that was still a high scoring game, and it would be under by this current number. I just don't know if Washington really has the skill position depth to really challenge on the scoreboard here. So I could see this in the vein of like a 35-14 win for the Lions, at which point we're both happy. The under is completely safe, and the Lions have covered by a pretty significant margin. So that's my lean here. I think that Detroit does its part, Washington does not. Therefore, we get the under 55.